Now, people who've watched this channel before will know that I am not a fan of Sebastian Payne. I have multiple times referred to him as a part-time Will from the In-Betweeners impersonator, but mostly I think he's a gigantic partisan hack who's desperately angling for a seat in the Conservative Party. Everybody can see it, everyone secretly knows it, and he's just somebody who went to private school, went to a posh university, and then thinks like he's a God-given right to have his opinions heard by everybody and respected. He now, after having worked as a continued hack journalist for a bunch of right-wing news outlets, he now is the head of the think tank UK Onward, and even admits on his own Twitter bio that he's sponsored by a bunch of arms and petrochemical firms to be a propagandist for them, for at least one of the less opaquely funded think tanks. So I will throw him the tiniest bit of credit for at least telling us what kind of propagandist he is, rather than allow us to guess what kind of propagandist he is, at the very, very least. And he has had some fresh takes on the Israel-Gaza conflict, and on the reaction of what's happening in the United Kingdom. And this journalistic abortion that he's brought forth is so rancid, I have to do a segment on it. I can't get away with not talking about it because it's so awful, so poisonous and full of originally outright lies and now barely concealed misdirections that I need to call him out for it. So the article is called "Too Many People in Britain Hold Views Opposed to Our Values." Now you'll see that I am using the archived version of this because it has since been updated since it was originally published, because he got called out on Twitter for being a lying scumbag and deliberately misrepresenting the views of tens of thousands of people. But anyway, we will get to that. So YouGov surveyed this nation this week to gauge their views on Hamas. The results should shock any decent person. Sajid Javid looked at me firmly and pledged that he'll fix this. It was in early 2018 and the long-awaited case review into community cohesion was sitting in the in-tray of a former local government secretary. He was drumming up media support for a big move on tackling extremism and segregation in Britain's most isolated communities. As the most senior cabinet minister of a non-white heritage, Javid said he personally had a unique opportunity to slay one of the greatest ills in our society. Circumstances, alas, interjected. Soon after this encounter, the Windrush scandal erupted, and Javid was rapidly promoted to the Home Office. Although his ministerial career flourished, hopes of that clear-sighted action on extremism were lost, although they don't expand anywhere on what the nature of the extremism that we was talking about and the lack of cohesion or the evidence of any of this from those specific reports. But I will take it in good faith for this one article in particular that both Seb and Javid indeed had noble goals, and there were things that were worth responding to from the Casey review. Of course, there is the potential as well that they are just dog whistling towards the idea of enclavization, which has some problem but it's not wide scale as far as I'm concerned. But I'm not going to quibble on these specific facts that I don't know very much about. Dame Louise Casey warned that social cohesion and equality are not things we can take for granted. They require careful tending, commitment and bravery from us all. Yet this is exactly what we have done ever since. I think that I will agree that I think Dame Louise Casey is correct in her comments. We do need to take social cohesion carefully. We do need to treat that carefully. I'm not going to quibble with that. Britain is now reaping what it has sown with its failure to tackle what she called worrying levels of exclusion, particularly amongst some Muslim communities. Casey argued for an oath of integration into British society to end parallel lives between the regressive views in some communities and the mainstream views of tolerance. Not necessarily untrue. I think there is a problem with some levels of disunity in terms of views. You look at the problems with the anti-LGBT protests at the schools in Birmingham, but I think these represent a fringe in terms of the kind of political action they want to take on these views. If you actually look at one of the most highly Muslim communities in the country, which is Tower Hamlets, they have elected a pro-LGBTQ plus mayor in terms of Lutfur Rahman, and Aspire running the council have been a pro-LGBTQ as well. So I don't think you can specifically say there's a problem in the Muslim communities in general, rather than just there is an issue of enclavization, which should have some issues to fix. And I've talked about this before on stream, but I don't think this is some kind of impending end of society problem. Labour's Shukra Muna agreed that extremism was sapping our communities of trust. From a lack of trust flows anti-Semitism. The result can be seen on the streets of British cities as the ripples of the Israel-Gaza conflict hit these shores. On one side, we see thousands marching on London streets, actively championing a prescribed terrorist organisation. He is trying to claim that every single person in the tens of thousands who marched across in London, in Manchester, across many cities across this country, tens of thousands of people, chat, or possibly even hundreds of thousands of people, who were once wanting there not to be an occupation in Palestine, for there to be a blockade on Gaza, for there to be human rights violations continue with the people of Palestine over and over and over again for decades, on top of war crimes being committed now. By saying these things, as far as Sebastian Payne is concerned, you're supporting terrorism, right? There is no difference between Palestine and Hamas as far as Sebastian Payne is concerned. And we know, right? We know that this guy he's feeling like he's being caught out on this one, because they literally read the article and inserted some actively championing a prescribed terrorist organization, which is an interesting turn of phrase, because some could be any number. That could be 1%, it could be 5%, it could be 20%, it could be 0.0001%. Those are all potential sums of people. But by being incredibly vague with the language here, you can still essentially, even if you're not ascribing these views to the whole of them, the fact that there is the potentiality for these people to be welcomed by others who don't necessarily agree with that view leaves the entire movement culpable. And that's what he's doing, this sneaky little trick by saying, oh, it's only some of them, which could mean loads of them, or it could mean like it could mean two, it could mean literally 2 or 3 of them that we could be using as the representative sample for those who back Hamas in terms of what he's saying here. This is such a brazen, such a fucking ridiculous and unjustifiable manipulation of rhetoric from what was originally just like a blanket statement. What's originally a blanket statement condemning everybody who thinks that Palestine should be free, for being in support of terrorism, to then the mealy-mouthed change to make it was only some of them, which still implicates basically everybody. Because if you're standing there with someone who supports terrorism, how much better are you than them if you are willing to stand with them? When really and truly it was a tiny minuscule minority who probably didn't even make themselves clear. I even saw there was videos of some guy with a Hamas flag being scolded by other people in the crowd. So the idea that these people are tantamount to be complicit is complete nonsense as far as the actual campaign is concerned. But regardless, his framing here is so repugnant, so repulsive. It's emblematic of the failure of our political class, of the failure of our media class, of the deliberate manufacturing consent, the Neo-McCarthyism that they've been engaging in to try and completely undermine everybody who believes in the rights of the Palestinian people, who doesn't indeed take the media line on the state of Israel and the things they do and their complete impunity to act however they want to Palestinians. It's such an absolutely awful, horrendous take for him to have here. A smear. That's what it is. A vile smear from Sebastian Payne against everybody who stands up for Palestine. To then say, those who chanted, from the road to the sea, Palestine must be free. Well, it will be free, but there you go. While donning badges of paragliders, as if those two are the same, right? There were 2 people. We have pictures of 2 people with paragliders. And even if they were slapped on the back, I don't really think that was, I think that there's a potential that was done by somebody else, right? Rather than from them explicitly, because it's just some tape and slapped on the back. But you know what? Let's take it in earnest that these people were indeed Hamas supporters. They found 2. They found 2 with the paraglider things. They found 1 person with a Hamas flag. That's it, right? Definitively 3 people. And even then, he's trying to equivocate here between people calling for a one-state solution, which is what this is, right? From the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, is a call for a single-state solution, where there is a single secular state, where there is no, ethno-state anymore. You can call it Israel, you can call it Palestine, you can call it Israel-Palestine. But fundamentally, the freedom of the people, the lack of statehood, the blockade, the apartheid state, that system of oppression has to go. And that's what the single-state solution position is. It's not even one I particularly subscribe to or think is particularly pragmatic. But to try and say that people who say from the river to the sea are people who don badges of paragliders and endorse Hamas's vile acts, that's just a brazen, categorical misconstruing of what these people believe. It's such an awful and underhanded smear tactic that this man is, quite frankly, engaging in journalistic malpractice. It's abominable that he's being allowed to get away with, and he will get away with this. He will get away with this. No one will hold this guy to account because he can just change one word to say some and take very little meaning changed in the sentence that's been said here. Very little meaning changes, but there's plausible deniability to smear huge entire sections of society as being terrorist sympathisers. And that's what they did with Jeremy Corbyn, which we will see later on in this article, because of course the jam man will indeed be brought up. Don't you forget. Don't you be under any illusion that we will not get round to the fucking jam man when it comes to this article. Anyway, YouGov surveyed the nation this week to gauge their views on Hamas. The results should shock any decent person. Keep in mind this is an organisation that's reportedly not done this. This was a lie, but indiscriminately murdered and taken hostage pregnant women and Holocaust survivors alike, and has killed babies. They definitely killed babies. The polling shows that 20% of Britons don't know whether Hamas is a terrorist organisation. Among 18 to 24-year-olds, that number rises to 49%. We can take some comfort in what the majority thinks, but ignoring this vocal minority will be a massive mistake. Seb, I know you're not stupid. Right, Seb, I know you're not stupid. I know you're a smart character. You've won awards for your journalism, quote unquote. Right? I will humour you into calling this journalism, where I think that it probably skirts that definition pretty substantially, but we'll call it journalism for now because you've won awards for it. You know full well what don't know means in polling. It doesn't mean that people are unaware of their own position on Hamas and they think that it could go either way. These people don't know who Hamas are. That's what don't know means. Is Hamas a terrorist organization? And the usual response is, who is Hamas? Do you think every 18 to 24-year-old is clinging to their screens knowing full well about the intricacies of geopolitical conflict in the Middle East? Are you trying to tell me you think that every 18 to 24-year-old, 49% no less, are so cognizant of the tensions in the Middle East? Don't know is, I am unaware of the situation. I'm not sure is, I haven't made up my mind. These are two completely different things that you're saying here. And to try and say that people who don't know who Hamas are, or what Hamas is, or what the definition of terrorism that they would be linked to is somehow indicative of people being anti-Semitic, this is nonsense. This is complete hack journalism that doesn't know how polling works. And again, this ridiculous conflation of people not knowing who Hamas are and people saying that they don't know whether or not they're a terrorist group is, again, this is shocking, absolutely shocking. Maybe there are some people in that 49% or that 27% of 18 to 24-year-olds and then all Britons together. Maybe some portion of those don't knows are people who are unsure, right? Maybe that's the case. But you don't have any proof of that. You have no proof, and you're using this figure that has plenty of ambiguity towards what it's saying here as a carte blanche to say that this is why anti-Semitism is happening, is because people just are still on the fence as to whether they think Hamas have engaged in terrorism or not. It literally, absolutely ridiculous conflation of data. The tolerance for such racism against Jews has only become putrefied at grassroots level. It cannot be forgotten that the hard left, and one individual in particular, bears a vast responsibility for abetting rise in anti-Semitism in recent years. Now, this is again another claim, no evidence for this, zero evidence for this, so that if you go to the link for tolerance for racism against Jews, if you go to this link, it is discussion of the geopolitical groupings of Iran, Syria, Russia, Hamas, and China against the West, as if that is tolerance for racism against Jews in the UK. Literally, all of this article is just discussions about geopolitical conflict. There's no evidence for what he's saying here in this article. And the second article about the rise in anti-Semitism and abetting the rise in anti-Semitism is a link to an article about Jeremy Corbyn and Labour MPs being incorrect potentially about the Israeli airstrike and also condemning war crimes, right? Which we know the IDF have engaged in. They're currently committing war crimes right now by engaging in collective punishment. Literally collective punishment they did on day one, that's a war crime. They need to be condemned for him. It's simple as that. As simple as that. And so he has no evidence for anything here, no evidence for any of his claims, but just people said bad things about my emotional support ethno-state. And that is his justification for saying that the hard left has a vast responsibility for the rise in anti-Semitism. Apparently a vast responsibility by critiquing the state of Israel, not even the state of Israel, the actions of the state of Israel. Apparently, guys, this is what he is using as his evidence for the idea that the vast majority or vast responsibility for the rise of anti-Semitism lies with the hard left, which doesn't even define here. Just anyone to the left of Gerhard Schroeder, apparently, is hard left in terms of his eyes. Again, horrendous, disgraceful journalism from Sebastian Payne. No evidence at all. No evidence at all for any of this. Then he talks about a panel he was on with Chris Mullin, where he said that Jeremy Corbyn wasn't anti-Semitic. And apparently, this is a bleak comment that Jeremy Corbyn is not an anti-Semite. Apparently it's bleak, the idea that we could say that maybe Jeremy Corbyn doesn't hate Jewish people. And then his evidence is a comment about Zionists don't understand English irony, which was already being debunked before, and him asking about free speech with regards to the mural in East London. That's his whole evidence for Corbyn being an anti-Semite. One mural that he said shouldn't be taken down for free speech reasons, and a comment about Zionists not understanding English irony. Okay, brilliant. The guys are just a massive anti-Semite. All of the anti-Semitism that's happening in this country, every anti-Semitic attack, every bakery that has his window smashed in, for example, by like Nazi thugs or whatever it is, all of that can be blamed on Jeremy Corbyn talking about English irony. Simple as that. And then he also says Corbyn's cranky takes on the Israel-Gaza war, which again links to an article talking about supporting Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Let's Control F for Corbyn in this whole article. Corbyn isn't even mentioned in this article. He's linking to an article as his source for Corbyn's cranky takes on the Israel-Gaza war, and he's not even mentioned in the article. His views still have traction, and the movement that he created still exists. His cranky takes are apparently there should be a ceasefire and Israel shouldn't commit war crimes, and we should end the occupation. That's cranky, that's cranky according to him. And when we see that over 70% of the UK population support having a ceasefire, for example, that you're cranks, right? According to Sebastian Payne, if you agree with Jeremy Corbyn on there being a ceasefire, 78% of the population, all cranks, right? All Trotskyist interests into the British public, apparently. This is complete nonsense. Again, so little sourcing. I would like to point out, none of this is sourced. None of this is sourced at all. He had one poll from YouGov, which he misunderstood how things get polled. And he took that as a case for which he can condemn everybody on the hard left, everyone who supports Palestine, Jeremy Corbyn and everybody who supported him can be smeared as being anti-Semites because of one poll that doesn't even say what he thought it said. Otherwise, what he's trying to say is that there should be tough sentences for people who are pro-Palestine. And what he said throughout this article is that pro-Palestine equals pro-Hamas. This is what he said in this article, is everyone on the street, all those hundreds of thousands of people, all of them pro-Hamas. And by that, if you take that to its natural conclusion, when he say that those espousing pro-Hamas views on our street should be dealt harshly and immediately, he then links to an article talking about potential for terrorism. So he thinks that all these people are potential terrorists from the article that he's linked to, and then from the toughness, it must assume he's also talking about the kind of arrests that we've seen, people being arrested for holding Palestinian flags. He's trying to manufacture consent, which I know people are discussing in chat, but what he's trying to do is manufacture consent for people to want to continue to support crackdowns on the right to protest. Crackdowns on the right to protest to demonstrate against the apartheid state of Israel. I cannot believe this article. I cannot believe this article. He's a disgrace to journalism. And I don't hold journalists in very high regard at all, chat. You know me, I'm not a fan of journalists in this country. But this is absolutely bottom of the barrel tabloid journalism from a complete and utter hack who is potentially going to be an MP, because I know he's angling to be a parliamentary candidate for the Conservative Party, hence why he joined the think tank, hence why he's, in his bathrobe at Jacob Rees-Mogg's house, just for a flying visit, apparently. These completely establishment-saturated hacks. I cannot believe it. I just cannot believe the absolute dross that this article is. And he's an absolute disgrace. Absolute fucking disgrace, and he'd be ashamed of himself. Totally ashamed of himself. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.